Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Bill Kapeles. I'm the operations manager for the world's largest shooting school, a place called Front Sight out in Nevada. A little bit of backstory is germane to this lecture simply because it helps understand how we got to where we're at with regard to the migration to Xojo. Front Sight started 20 years ago by two guys with a credit card and a dream. And when they started selling their product, they kept track of it in all things, a Word file. So 5 years into the company's history, a FileMaker developer got a hold of them and migrated this Word file to a FileMaker database. In the ensuing 15 years, it has been expanded and developed to the point of being a fully functional system for a huge company. $30 million annual revenue, 200,000 members, 50,000 students a year, which equates to about 100,000 student days a year. So it's a big operation now. I inherited this database about five and a half years ago as a FileMaker developer, and I call it Frankenstein. It was like one part was bolted on whenever something was needed. There was no clear design, but that was just the way it grew. So we decided to do a complete rewrite, and we did. We have a great system now. It works really well. But we're running into a lot of the limitations of FileMaker. We're running into some costs that we don't like associated with the FileMaker licensing model. So we made the decision to look for an alternative. And this is back in 2016. So that's when I found Xojo. Xojo is the perfect solution for our problem. It allows us to do anything we want, meet all our needs in terms of web, in-house apps, iPhone apps, eventually Android. And so we thought this would be a great fit. And I went to Xojo in Houston, or XDC in Houston, excuse me, and came away, happy, powered up, ready to go, and ran into a brick wall. So I found some things that everybody needs to know when they're coming to FileMaker coming to Xojo from a platform like FileMaker. In FileMaker and other apps, all user authentication is taken care of under the hood. Security of the database is taken care of. Manipulation of the database is basically taken care of. So you know nothing about it. You come to Xojo and you run into this brick wall of not knowing any of it, and your learning curve goes vertical. So to pick up on our history, we disliked FileMaker. We got to Xojo and went back to Pahrump thinking we're going to sit down and over the next 2 years program this out and be happy and live happily ever after. The learning curve went vertical. We couldn't do anything because we didn't know any of the supplemental things. And so now we spent all of 2017 learning what we didn't know. That's what this presentation is designed to give the user, so that instead of spending a year of your time figuring out all the ancillary technologies that go along with programming in Xojo, hopefully it'll give you a quick packet of resources so that you can go back home, look at them over the next month, and then hit the ground running. So there's a ton of problems that we faced, but I distilled it down to 4 or 5 for this presentation simply because there's too many to go into. So we had to pick the big ones. Xojo itself is the easy part. Because of the effort put into the intro to programming, all the blog and the video posts that Paul does, Bob Keeney's training software, which is phenomenal, and a host of other stuff, learning Xojo is the easy part. So the real problems that I ran into was figuring out which database we were going to go with of the different types, how we were going to host it, how we were going to do our apps, because we have a very diverse user base as well as needs for our business, and then how to manage the security and who can do what, because that was all foreign to us coming from FileMaker. So the case study that we're going to kind of frame everything in for the context of this lecture is a payroll system that we have existing in FileMaker right now. We wrote it back in 2012, put it into production in 2013. It's been running great. It works really well. We run it locally hosted. We don't do cloud for FileMaker. And it does the basic HR stuff. And we allow our 220, 230 employees to jump into it and control their availability and do the basic HR functions. So when we put this into the context of figuring out which database we need, we get the big four choices. SQLite simply just isn't capable of doing what we need, so that was just off the board. So that leaves us with the 3 SQLs. And after we got digging into it, the MySQL and the Postgres were really only the 2 options. Microsoft's licensing format was ridiculously expensive given what we needed to do, so we just threw that one out. So we settled on Postgres, and the answer is pretty, come on, PowerPoint. The answer is pretty straightforward as to why. It's free, it's Xojo friendly, and with the flip of the switch on the cloud, it works on Xojo Cloud. Really, of the 2, between MySQL and Postgres, there's really no reason to monkey with MySQL given how Xojo's set up. Now, I know everybody's going to have a different take on that, but for ease of transitioning, Postgres was the obvious choice. So how do we learn Postgres, right? We are not DBAs. We are not SQL experts. We barely knew what SQL meant, right? So we started looking for the various resources. And what we found in terms of the easiest way to learn how to manage, install, and use Postgres was the book on the screen, Learning Postgres 10. That takes you through everything you need. One cycle through that book, and you can do basic server management, installs, table creations, indexing, the whole 9 yards. And we got through it in, about 6 weeks? I should introduce my partner in crime over here, John Eisen. Raise your hand, John. John is also a developer with FrontSight, so he's part of this process. And then you have to have the admin utility, and there's 338 of them available. We settled on Navicat simply because it worked well, had great reviews, cheap, and was used in the book as well. So don't waste a lot of time figuring out which is the best. Just pick one and go with it. You can change it later. But the book was actually one of the best things that we got into. We looked at 10 or 12 different ones, and this is the one that we settled on. So we got through the book. We got our Postgres install. Xojo still wouldn't work with it. Another brick wall. In fact, in the process of learning how to do the installs, I even went through the Enterprise DB website where they have the one-click install version of Postgres. You download it to your Mac, you click the button, and you have a working server, right? And you can connect to it, but you can't really do anything else. You can't insert, you can't update, nothing. And that's because you have to config Postgres. You have to actually edit a file, go in, change a bunch of settings to make it work, to make it accept connections from IPs, to allow you to do whatever. And that was a huge, huge problem for us. We didn't have time to dig into this, and we eventually found one thing that told us how to do it. In fact, John found it. And if you do one thing and one thing only to learn how to set up your Postgres, you need to go to this gentleman's website, watch his movie. He takes you through the configuration of a Postgres server from A to Z, the most common settings, and it's clear, concise, to the point, and it takes just a few hours to get done. The guy's name is Christoph Pettis. The link there is to the PDF that kind of gives you the checklist for it. The real powerful one, though, come on, PowerPoint. The real powerful one is the YouTube video, where he takes you through an actual install setup, shows you how to do the settings, exactly what to type in. It was a great resource, and we highly recommend it. So now that we've got the Postgres problem figured out, we're going to use it. Hosting the database becomes a big issue. Now, you might think, well, you pay your money, you can put it on the cloud, you buy a server, you can do it local, but there's a lot more variables involved there. When you're talking about multi-platform apps, web apps versus desktops or phone or whatever, they don't all interact with your database the same way. So you run into latency problems, you run into serious lags, you run into data lock problems, where if somebody is editing data from the cloud and you're trying to do it from a desktop, you can run into problems there. So we had to figure out solutions as to how we were going to host it to make it work for our business. And in the scheme of our business, the particular app that we're talking about, the little payroll app, it has to be accessed locally through our in-house HR people, the payroll folks, and it also has to be accessed from the web from our 200 and some employees. So we're trying to figure out, well, do we use the Xojo cloud and just put the database on the cloud and everybody uses the cloud? Or do we need to host it local and let the web folks come in from the cloud, from the web app? And to further complicate that, you have to take where your business is into regard. So FrontSight sits on 550 acres in the middle of the Nevada desert, halfway between Las Vegas and California. So if internet goes down, we're pretty much isolated. It's not like we have a lot of backup. We have pretty robust tech out there. But if our database is on the cloud and we lose our connection, our in-house operations are basically shut down. So we have to lean toward hosting it local. And that brings in a whole nother set of problems, which we'll get to in just a moment. Hosting on the cloud is certainly better in terms of cost and ease and everything else, but you have to weigh it against all the problems. So cheap and reliable for AWS, Rackspace, whatever, but the big problem there is you have to do all your security, right? And it's hard to configure. The ones that we looked into, they weren't Xojo app ready. The only thing that we found that was straightforward was Xojo Cloud itself. So for cloud hosting, if you're going to do the cloud, Xojo Cloud, we believe, is the way to go. The entry level, if I remember correctly, is $50 a month. Gives you some decent throughput. Configuration is really a non-issue. If you sign up for your account, it's pretty much configured. If you want Postgres, you move a little slider and put in your passwords and everything, and you have Postgres ready. And the biggest pro for using Xojo Cloud Hosting is the security that they offer. You don't have to worry about defending your app from 30,000 attacks a minute or whatever it is. It's a ridiculous amount. They do it for you. The con, no 24-hour tech support. So as it's been said to me, is don't launch on a Friday. Local hosting has some pretty cool pros. It's right there. That makes it fast. It's just as reliable. The hardware is reliable as anything else in the cloud. You can completely customize it. You can see it, you can touch it, you can unplug it when you want. There's not a lot of bad that goes with it, except for you're responsible for all aspects of security, server management, everything. And then you own it. And by that I mean you are paying for it. It's not like you're paying the throughput fee on AWS. You're paying for the machines. You're paying for all the little cables. You're paying for the switches. You're paying for the firewall. You're paying for everything. And so the costs are huge compared to cloud hosting. So what we wound up with, we went with local hosting, is 2 servers. So a big one for all the data and the various databases, and a little one. There's a poltergeist. Operating system is Ubuntu. Awesome because it's free. Awesome because it's Ubuntu. A Pegasus RAID array for on-site backup cost us about $1,000. Off-site backup, we used Dropbox. I wonder if having your phone in the same pocket as the microphone receiver is a good idea. There we go. Anyway, we use Dropbox for offsite backup, and that's about $1,000 a year for plenty of space. And then the Palo Alto firewall for securing our incoming. As you can see, I've blocked the price. Back when I attended Xojo in 2016, I was 180 pounds, had all my hair, none of it was gray. After digging into security, well, you can see what happened, right? And that's not even the full story. We actually have 2 Palo Altos, because if one goes down, you need a spare. We have a saying where two is one is none. So it's a very, very expensive piece of equipment. So think hard before you go the local hosting route. Our business is robust enough that we can afford this, and we have a wide enough application that we need it. But if you have a client that's a mom and pop, that they aren't a $30 million a year company, cloud hosting is probably the way to go, and you live with the latency. So I changed this slide last night on the fly. Which app are we going to do, right? I screwed up the slide last night. We're doing the locally hosted DB servers plus the web app on Xojo Cloud. That was the original plan, right? Because I didn't want to mess with configuring a web server for Xojo. I figured I'd just pay the $50 a month. We would have the little web app out there in the cloud, and it could talk to our server on our property. Well, after talking with David and a few others here over the course of the last couple days, now that's back up in the air. So now we're looking more at hosting things, all of it local rather than on Xojo Cloud. So the punchline for all this, where you host your stuff, is it's not as cut and dried as you may believe when you first get into this and you start thinking, well, a web app, I can just hit the deploy button, it's live, it's ready to go, and it'll work, which is true. But there's a lot of other considerations like accessibility, reliability given tech shortage or tech outages that are out of your control that you have to take into account before you make that decision, especially if you're advising a third party, a client, on how to do it, because you're going to wear the egg if their business shuts down because they can't get to their app or their database is inaccessible, or if their cashier is waiting 60 seconds for a screen to update because you're too geographically separated from your data. So it wasn't an easy decision. And I still don't know exactly how we're going to do it, but like I said, now we're leaning toward full local hosting. And for our business, for the size that eventually our Xojo solution will take for our entire business operation, it makes a lot of sense. So then the app, right? We can choose any of the stuff that Xojo can do, and it offers us incredible flexibility. It allows us to pick and choose the features and how we're going to do it. But one size does not fit all. And this really comes into play with who your user base is, where they're at relative to your servers and your main core business. And as I explained, we have to have on-site capability 24 hours a day. We have to be able to put people in and out of courses, rent guns, whatever the thing is. We cannot afford any type of blackout. So on the other hand, I don't necessarily want to open up our main internet pipe into our property to our 200,000 members that hit our website to register for courses and do that type of thing. Because that's the eventual solution that we're headed toward. This little payroll app is just the first step. So we have to probably do both. Have some kind of app that allows our users to interact, that doesn't necessarily impinge upon our ability to operate locally, yet our 80+ employees that work on this database constantly need fast, reliable access. So the desktop app, obviously, it allows the high priority local people to hit the database quickly, as much as they need to, with no fear of losing access. But the web app allows those people out in the world to still hit it. So we have to approach it with dual. I've talked to guys here at the conference who have managed to allow people to interact across a widely dispersed set of businesses all through web app, and it worked for them. Talked to another guy where only local would work. So it really comes down to what you're willing to tolerate in the event of outages and time delay into which app you choose. And I wish that had been really emphasized in the intro materials to Xojo, because we wasted a lot of time going down the road of web app, thinking, well, we can run everything off the web and everybody will be happy and it's an easy deployment solution. And it was a pretty naive approach. And so if you're new, you need to consider that, particularly if you're advising somebody else. So now the bane of our existence, right? FileMaker, Access, all those, they handle the security for you. You set up your users, you give them a privilege set, input a password, Everything else is handled. When we started researching this, there's more material on app and web security than we could possibly digest. So we did our best to narrow it down to some big areas. And there's some absolutes. We're responsible for the security of the app. Doesn't matter who did what to whom, the egg is going to be on our face if we get a breach. Now, depending on what your focus is or what your client's focus is, that could be medical information, it could be social security numbers, it could just be names and addresses. And those have value. You know, the 600,000-700,000 names in our marketing list, we could sell for a lot of money. People would love those names. Whatever the data is has to be protected. And the other absolute is you will be attacked. Now, in the keynote, Jeff was talking about how often that their servers get scanned, and it got to the point that they couldn't really keep up with it, so they extrapolated it out to over 1 billion times. Well, we use a thing that watches how many times we get scanned, and we get scanned about 10,000 times a month, and we're a little training business in the middle of the desert. So imagine if your client is a bank or a multinational, whatever, you know, plumbing parts, it doesn't really matter. The bigger the business, the more you're a target. So you have to take this absolutely seriously. And the first part of it is physical security. And physical security in the virtual world is something that most people overlook. In our business, we take it pretty serious because of what we do. We train people, law enforcement officers, military people with firearms. So we own a lot of guns, fully automatic weapons, big guns, lots of ammo. So physical security is right up there for us. Not so with everybody. You know, Bob's pretty good pawn shop probably doesn't need the level of security we do, or the French bakery down the street that wants a little app to let people order online. They don't need to worry so much about the physical security. But every server needs to be secured. And that's one huge advantage of cloud hosting, is that most of the providers come with pretty robust physical security. I was talking to a gentleman who was interviewing for a place with rack space in Las Vegas, and he was going through a background check that was on par with a national security position. So I mean, they are aware of it, they take good precautions. Nothing is 100%, but if you're hosting your own, that's on you. You have to do your own national security level type of security. Let me open that. The other side of that is your users. Figuring out how to let people in, what they can do in your app. That's a huge headache too when you don't have something under the hood like FileMaker running it for you. So we all know that users are lazy. Anybody recognize that password? One of the most common things. If you look at your keyboard, you'll figure out why. And they don't care about app security. You know, whether they're a high-level employee or the newest, lowest level guy, they could care less. They just want the thing to work. In fact, the high-level employees are probably the worst. And even when they're burned by something, whether it's on the personal side or on the work side, they don't care. They're still going to be lazy. They're still going to be prone to using stupid passwords. And so we have to take care of that for them. And that has been a technological hurdle, to say the least. Not knowing how to do it. And so there's some vocabulary that comes in that most people kind of take for granted in this industry. And authentication is pretty straightforward, but it's an important point. It's identifying who is logging into your system and making sure they are who they are, so you're not being spoofed. Authorization. The person that is logging in, are they allowed to do whatever it is they're trying to do? Username, we all know what a username is. Password, we all know that one, of course. And hash is another term that is new to a lot of people. It was certainly new to us. A hash is a one-way function that turns a password, like password, into a string of gibberish that cannot be converted back to password. Salt is a random bit of data that is combined with the password when it is hashed to make it more difficult to unhash or to guess. And obesity is a concept of security. And we're going to talk extensively about security through obesity. It makes a lot of sense, but we'll get into that momentarily. And then version control on your passwords. So if you're going to hash passwords, you might change how you hash it several different times. And the version control tells your system which version to use when working with the passwords. So to set this up, to set up user authentication, you're going to make two tables. One of usernames might have some other data in it, but the other one is passwords. And it does not actually include the passwords. It only includes hashes. The password table is an obese table on a separate server. So this is where we're going to stop and talk about obesity. Obesity is not just a chronic health problem for the US and everywhere else these days. Obesity is the concept of adding a ton of fake records to your data so that when somebody tries to breach it, they can't tell real data from fake. All right? And it gives you some advantages that we'll also get to in terms of size. So if they try to download your user table and everything, they're downloading terabytes of data rather than a small real user table. It makes it much harder for dictionary attacks and rainbow attacks, which is where hackers out in the world have lists of hash strings that they fire against your system to try to find one that is real and get in, and several other things. And we've gone one step further, and we put our password table on a separate server only accessible from an internal IP from the primary server. So it has no external connection whatsoever. You would have to be physically in the room to be able to try to steal the table. So this is how you set your security tables up. Your username table, it's going to have your primary key. Of course, we just use a generic ID. The username, salt, hash, password version. Password table has obviously a key, the hash, and the salt. Now you'll notice the little paragraph at the bottom is very important, and I'll read it because it's probably, you guys can probably read it. The key word here is your salts need to be random and unique, so that every time a password is hashed, it's not using a repeated salt, which puts a chink in the armor of allowing people to guess it. So here's how it works. Your guy puts his username into your field, Big Papa 1, right? And he clicks go, and he puts the password in, and it's something stupid like password 123. So the app uses his username to look up the salt from the username table. It then takes that salt and his stupid password and hashes it. In our system, I think we do it 538 times or something goofy, and looks at the password table. If it finds it, it takes the hash 1, grabs salt 2, rehashes it, and looks back into the username table for that hash. So there's two separate tables, and there's no relationship to them except the password, and that's not known. It's not recorded anywhere. And what we've found through the research that we've done is this is the most secure way to make sure that people cannot hack into your stuff. They still can, but they got to work at it. And if found, that user is authenticated, and it goes on into your system. So a couple of takeaways on using this method of password security as well as obesity is it allows you to slow down an attack. If you go by the assumption that your system will be attacked, you want to make it as difficult as possible for them to do so. And as I mentioned previously, slowing down the attack is by making it a huge amount of data. If your username and password tables are 200K each, how long does it take to download those? Seconds? But if your hash table is 4 terabytes, most of it is gibberish data, not real, it takes hours, if not days, to download it. That slows it down, gives you a better chance to stop it. It also makes the attack louder. And by louder, we simply mean you're going to see a spike in your bandwidth. If somebody is hitting your servers trying to download those tables, your bandwidth usage is going to go up 10, 20, 30, maybe 100 times. You should be monitoring that anyway, because if your app suddenly starts using a huge amount of bandwidth and it normally doesn't, you probably want to know about it regardless of the cause. But with an attack, it allows you to see it right away and put the brakes on it. You also want to try to force a direct connection. So there's two ways to look at that. And one I already mentioned. To get to our password table, you're going to have to plug into our server, standing in our server room, and get into it that way. Another way to look at it is a lot of these attacks come through Tor or proxies and can't be traced, but that's slower. So if you make it hard enough to do that through a proxy network, you can slow it down and force them to figure out a way to connect directly to your server, which is much more difficult. You want to try to increase the attacker's resource costs. So when Xojo, the bad guy out in the world, is trying to download your 4 terabyte your 4 terabyte table, they need a place to store it. Additionally, it's hard to upload that to the internet to publish it so other people can try to hack it. So the bigger you make these things to have them as an impediment to being stolen, the more they got to spend and work to actually use it. Traffic pattern analysis can come into play during an attack. If you are watching for it, if you're monitoring your bandwidth and who's connecting and from where, when you see the spike, you can use traffic pattern analysis to go back through where they're attacking from and potentially get their IP. Potentially. There's no guarantees, but that's a subject that requires several books to figure out, but it's out there as a tool. And then the other one is set traps. And I kind of like this one because it never really occurred to me to booby trap any app that I wrote. I never even thought it was needed in FileMaker. And one of them is web application traps, where as you allow your users to interact with your app, bring back their hash string as part of your return from loading their user data, and compare that to a table on your app of bogus hash strings early in your table. So if one of these bogus hash strings, which looks like a real account but isn't, comes up, your app sends you an alert, says you've been compromised. There's network traps, same philosophy. Google traps, you can set automated alerts in Google and other apps like ITTT, if this and that, where it looks for some of your spurious hashes out in the net. So you take a selection of 400 or 500, you set alerts on them early in your table, the first 400 or 500 fake ones, and if they're found, it sends you an alert and it tells you you've been compromised. And then there's account traps, where you put purposely easy to hack passwords in what looks to or what appears to be real accounts, so that if you're compromised, those easy to guess passwords are going to get hacked and they'll log in. If your app detects that spurious account logging in, it alerts you, you've been compromised. So some really easy ways of figuring out if somebody is using data from your tables that are quick to implement. So security through obesity is a huge topic, pun intended. And here's some resources for you that do a much better job of explaining it in much more detail than I could possibly do in this little session. I also want to talk really quick about physical security before we go on, though. Physical security, most people think it's a locked door. You have your server room or server sitting on a shelf. Maybe you've got some backup drives. And if you're really, really intent on keeping it shut, you might have a lock on the door. If you have a valuable system in a business, you need to go further than that. They aren't going to want to spend the money, but you need to put real security on that room. So if they have a locked door, you can pick the lock in 10 seconds. You're in, you take the server and run if you wanted to, right? You need to have a room that cannot be broken into easily through the door, but also through the walls or ceiling or ductwork. The cables that run to and from need to be protected so that they can't be chopped in the middle and intercepted. Any component of the network has to have access control. Otherwise, it's an open port, people can get in. How much security is enough? Well, who said it during one of the sessions that the only way to be secure is to unplug your machine? Obviously, we can't go there, but you have to get your clients to spend money to give more than token lip service to locking a door on a server room. If their business is such that they could be a potential target, like if they're a defense contractor or a bank or healthcare institution, insurance company, something like that, they're going to be aware of the need, they're going to budget for it, just do your due diligence, maybe even hire a consultant, a third-party security consultant, to look at the physical security layout and make sure that your system is not going to get compromised because somebody went for the cheap lock instead of the access control stuff, okay? So it cannot be ignored. Now, the Xojo blog, Paul's thing, has a great example of how to do the password hash. I put the little code snippet up here, and the link will give you the whole thing, the whole file. We went one step further than this. We double salted, double hashed. This is a single salt, single hash. I don't know when he actually did, 2015, 10.9 actually. It's changed a little bit since then. So, but that was the screenshot I had. I highly suggest you check out that file, watch it through the entirety of the video. He takes you right through how to do it with Xojo. And we're happy to help you with that as well. So now let's talk a little bit about authorization. So we've beaten the horse about keeping the bad people out, right? But when the right people get in, we still don't want them running willy-nilly through our system. Not all users are created equal. We need to figure out a way to make sure that they only do what we want them to do. And because we have such a diverse user base, and eventually this system will expand to incorporate all our business operations, we kind of needed a one-size-fits-all solution. And so for this, we did a permission set. So each user gets several different permissions based on whatever their job function is. The Pro Shop cashier gets to do cash transactions, credit transactions, inventory stuff, but they don't necessarily get to look up credit card number transactions from user history, or they don't get to schedule courses for people, right? It's a pretty straightforward concept. The problem is it gets big. So you need to automate this a little bit in a way that you have classes of authorizations. So if you think of it in terms of FileMaker, FileMaker has a privilege set. You would create a privilege set for a Pro Shop user, or a privilege set for range staff, or whatever your types are in your business. You give them that privilege set, and they're pretty much good to go. Since Xojo doesn't allow us to use those privilege sets, we pretty much have to create them ourselves. So we list out various ones for the various applications in our organization, and we give them a set of records that corresponds to what we want them to do. We do that through two tables. So we have the user one, which includes our username and stuff, workflows, which are all the various processes that our system can do, and then the permissions table is just a join table with the ID of the workflow and the ID of the user. So when we want to check, let's say a guy clicks a button that says, hey, I want to run this transaction on the cash register. It looks really quick, does a search for his ID and the workflow of running a cash transaction or whatever. If they find it, great, do it. If not, they get a little dialogue that says, sorry, you can't do that. But that's the most streamlined way we found of doing it. And if anybody has a better idea for doing that on a large scale, I would love to hear it. And that's what I have for you, folks. When I talked previously in 2016 to all the Xojo guys, I told Jeff, sitting at a table on the last day, I said, you know, is there an all-in-one resource for learning what I need to know before I can really get going with Xojo? He said, you know, the Xojo blog, the forum, et cetera, all the things I've listed. There wasn't any little concise list. And I told him when I called in to offer to do this session, I said, I would have paid almost any amount of money to get the info that I just got in a short amount of time. And hopefully this session can be used for that purpose, because a lot of people should be coming to Xojo, but they may not, simply because there's such a steep learning curve outside of Xojo. So I hope that this session met that purpose. I hope it answered a couple questions for you guys. Do you have any questions for me? Yes, sir.
More of a comment regarding your integration between the host or your problem local hosted versus cloud hosted. Have you considered doing any kind of a database sync so you could have the best of both worlds?
Yeah, so the question is regarding our local hosting versus cloud hosting, have we looked at syncing databases, so basically maintaining a cloud version and a local version? We have. There's a cost associated with that, and there's a time associated with that, and we haven't really determined that it's cost effective for us to do that, given that the preponderance of our heavy database usage is local. But that is an option, and sadly we're still kind of looking at it, but I think we're going to go all local. Any other questions? Okay, guys, thank you for your attention. Please give us a holler if you have any questions about us or need any help with anything, and enjoy the rest of your day.